The unsolved mystery of D.B. Cooper, a legendary plane hijacking. Imagine a quiet afternoon in 1971, a man in a crisp suit boarding a plane with a bomb in his briefcase, and a daring escape into the night sky that would turn him into a legend. This is the story of D.B. Cooper, the only person to hijack a plane and vanish without a trace, leaving behind one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. How did he pull off such a bold plan? Where did he go with all that money? And why has no one ever found him? Let's dive into this incredible tale, step by step, exploring the heist, the clues, the theories, and the endless questions that keep us guessing even after more than 5 decades. It all started on November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, at Portland International Airport in Oregon. A man in his 40s, dressed in a dark suit, white shirt, and black tie, stepped up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter with a calm demeanor that hid his intentions. He bought a one-way ticket to Seattle for $20 under the name Dan Cooper, a name that would soon echo through time. Nothing about him stood out. He carried a small black briefcase, wore dark sunglasses, and blended seamlessly into the crowd of holiday travelers bustling through the terminal. The plane he boarded was a Boeing 727, a jet with a unique design that would play a key role in his plan. It took off with 36 passengers on board, including this unassuming figure who settled into a seat near the back, ready to set his scheme in motion. He lit a cigarette. Smoking was still permitted on flights in those days, and waited patiently, his eyes scanning the cabin as the plane climbed into the sky. The flight was short, just 30 minutes from Portland to Seattle, but that half hour would become the spark of a mystery that still burns today. About halfway through the journey, somewhere over the cloudy skies of the Pacific Northwest, he made his first move. He handed a folded note to a young flight attendant named Florence Schaffner, who was busy tending to passengers. She assumed it was a phone number or a clumsy attempt at flirtation, something she'd seen before, so she slipped it into her pocket without a second thought. That's when he leaned over, his voice low and steady, and said she'd better take a look. She unfolded the paper and froze as the words sank in. He had a bomb, and he wanted her to sit next to him. She obeyed, her heart racing, and glanced at his briefcase as he cracked it open just enough to reveal what looked like a deadly device. Red cylinders, tangled wires, a battery pack that could mean disaster at 30,000 feet. He didn't shout or wave a gun. He was calm, almost professional, as he laid out his demands in that same even tone. He wanted $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle to refuel the plane for a second leg of his journey. It was a plan so precise, so calculated, that it left no room for doubt. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment stunt. The crew relayed his demands to the ground, and the FBI sprang into action, their minds racing to figure out how to handle a hijacker who seemed to know exactly what he was doing. Northwest Orient executives huddled with agents, weighing their options. The bomb looked real enough, too real to gamble with 36 lives, and time was ticking. They decided to comply, pulling together $200,000 in $20 bills from a local bank, each note meticulously marked with serial numbers for tracking later. The parachutes, 2 main chutes and 2 reserves, were sourced from a nearby skydiving school, and a fuel truck was positioned on the tarmac. The plane landed in Seattle around 5 that evening, rain streaking the windows as it taxied to a halt. Cooper allowed the passengers to disembark, their footsteps echoing in the terminal as they hurried away, unaware of how close they'd come to danger. He kept the crew on board, 4 people, including the pilots and Schaffner, his hostages now in this high-stakes game. With the money and parachutes delivered, he inspected them carefully, running his fingers over the bundles of cash and checking the nylon straps of the chutes. Satisfied, he issued his next set of instructions. Take off again. Head for Mexico City. Fly below 10,000 feet. Keep the speed under 200 miles per hour, and leave the rear door unlocked. The Boeing 727 had a rare feature, a rear air stair that could drop down in flight, a ramp designed for quick exits, and he knew it inside out. That detail alone hinted at his knowledge. Maybe he'd worked in aviation. Maybe he'd studied the plane's blueprints. The crew hesitated, warning him that the range wouldn't stretch to Mexico without stopping, but he waved it off. They refueled in Seattle, the hum of the truck's pump filling the tense silence, and then the plane lifted off once more, climbing into the stormy dusk with just Cooper and his captives on board. Somewhere over southwestern Washington, in a wild stretch of forests and mountains between Ariel and Vancouver, he executed the heart of his plan. It was after 8 that night, the sky pitch black and roiling with a storm. The temperature outside hovered below zero, the wind howling at 40 miles per hour, conditions that would test even the toughest survivalists. He tied the money bag around his waist with a piece of cord, slipped into one of the main parachutes, and adjusted the straps over his suit jacket. Then he walked to the back, lowered the rear air stair, and stood there for a moment, the roar of the engines mixing with the rush of freezing air. The crew, locked in the cockpit, felt a sudden jolt. The plane's tail dipped as the weight shifted, and later realized it was the exact moment he jumped. At 10,000 feet, with nothing but darkness and wilderness below, he leapt into the void, the money strapped to him and the night swallowing him whole. The plane flew on, landing in Reno hours later, but when the crew checked the cabin, it was empty. No Cooper, no briefcase, just a few cigarette butts and a lingering sense of disbelief. The search kicked off at dawn, a massive operation that would become one of the biggest manhunts in FBI history. Hundreds of agents, local police, and military personnel poured into the forests of Washington state, their boots crunching through snow and mud. They had a rough idea of his drop zone, about 70 square miles of brutal terrain crisscrossed with rivers, cliffs, and towering pines. Helicopters swept the skies, their blades slicing through the fog, while tracking dogs sniffed for any hint of a trail. Soldiers from Fort Lewis joined in, combing the underbrush with rifles slung over their shoulders, expecting to find a body or a shredded parachute snagged in the trees. But day after day, they found nothing. No sign of a landing, no scraps of fabric, no footprints. The weather had been merciless. Freezing rain, gusting winds, visibility down to zero. Experts calculated his odds of survival as slim to none, especially in that thin suit and loafers. But Cooper defied every prediction. Why couldn't they find him? That's where the mystery takes hold. The jump was insane, 10,000 feet into a storm, over jagged wilderness, with no survival gear beyond a parachute. Most parachutists need training to land safely, let alone in conditions like that. Yet his plan suggested he wasn't a novice. He demanded a specific altitude, low enough to breathe without oxygen, a slow speed to make the jump feasible, and a plane with a rear exit he could control. Some speculated he was a military man, maybe a paratrooper from Vietnam, or a pilot familiar with the Boeing 727. Others wondered if he'd scouted the area, knowing where to land, a hidden cabin, a clearing only he could find. The FBI interviewed skydivers, checked flight schools, and mapped wind patterns, but every trail went cold. The money became their next hope, a breadcrumb that might lead them back to him. Those $200,000 in $20 bills, 10,000 notes, were all marked, their serial numbers logged in a massive database. Agents spread the word to banks, casinos, and stores across the country. Watch for these bills. They figured he'd spend them sooner or later, a car, a house, a night out, and they'd catch him when he did. But years passed, and not a single note surfaced. 5 years went by, then 10, and the cash stayed lost, mocking their efforts. Then, in 1980, a breakthrough, or a tease. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was digging a fire pit on a riverbank near Vancouver, Washington, when he unearthed 3 soggy packets of 20s, about $3,000, buried a few inches deep. The serial numbers matched Cooper's haul, sending agents racing to the scene. It was proof he'd been there, or at least his money had. But it raised more questions than answers. The spot, called Tina Bar, was 30 miles from the drop zone, too far for a parachute to drift. Had the Columbia River carried it there over 9 years? Had he buried it and lost it? The other 97%, nearly $200,000, stayed missing. Who was D.B. Cooper? That's the puzzle that's kept people hooked for decades. The flight attendants gave a sketchy picture: medium height, dark hair, dark eyes, around 40 years old, with a quiet voice and an unremarkable face. He wore a suit, sipped a bourbon and soda before the heist, and left no fingerprints, wiping down his seat with care. The FBI built a profile: an educated man, maybe ex-military, someone with a grudge or a thrill-seeker's heart. But it was guesswork. They rounded up over 100 suspects, chasing shadows across the country. Richard McCoy, a Vietnam vet and skydiver, pulled a copycat hijacking in 1972, parachuting with cash just like Cooper. But he was caught, and the crew didn't recognize his face. Kenneth Christensen, a former Northwest Airlines purser and paratrooper, fit the bill too. His brother found a stash of gold coins after his death in 1994, and he'd lived near Seattle. But the evidence was thin, and DNA didn't match. A wilder suspect, Dwayne Weber, confessed on his deathbed in 1995, whispering, "I'm Dan Cooper," to his wife. But his past didn't line up cleanly either. The letters added fuel to the fire, turning Cooper into a taunting ghost. Starting days after the jump, envelopes postmarked from cities like Minneapolis and Oakland arrived at newspapers and police stations. They were typed or handwritten, filled with boasts and cryptic ciphers, codes that promised to reveal his identity if cracked. One, a 408-symbol cipher mailed in 1969, was decoded by a teacher couple. "I like killing because it's so much fun," it read, a chilling glimpse into his mind, but no name. Another, the 340-symbol dripping pen cipher, stumped experts until 2020, when amateurs cracked it to reveal more taunts. "I'm not afraid of the gas chamber." But still no identity. Some letters might have been fakes, the handwriting inconsistent, but they painted a picture of a man reveling in his escape, a mastermind who loved the chase as much as the cash. What happened after he jumped? That's the heart of the story's pull. The drop was a death wish by most standards, 10,000 feet into a freezing storm, over a forest thick with pines and riddled with ravines. Experts said he'd have hit 60 miles per hour on descent, risking a snapped chute or a crash into the canopy. If he landed, he'd have faced sub-zero cold, no food, and miles of nowhere in dress shoes. Some think he died that night, his body lost to a river, his chute tangled in branches. Or maybe he drowned when the Columbia swept him away. The Tina Bar money backs that up. Maybe he lost it crossing water, the bag tearing open as he stumbled through the dark. But others see a different picture. A man who knew the land, who'd mapped his landing spot, a dirt road, a friend's cabin, a stash waiting in the woods. The lack of a body or gear supports it. No trace means he walked away, they argue. A few romantics picture him sipping a drink in some sunny hideout. The cash buried where no one would look, his suit swapped for a new life. The FBI gave up in 2016, closing the case after 45 years and millions spent. They called it a dead end. NORJAC, short for Northwest Hijacking, filed away as unsolvable. They'd interviewed thousands, tracked hundreds of leads, analyzed every letter and bill, but all they had was a sketch, a name, Dan Cooper, and a handful of soggy 20s. Yet the mystery lives on, thriving in books, podcasts, and barroom debates. People still hunt the forests, dreaming of a rusted chute or a hidden fortune. Every few years a new suspect pops up, DNA tests, grainy photos, whispered confessions, but nothing sticks. The woods of Washington keep their silence, and Cooper stays a flicker in the sky, a name, a plan, a leap into legend. This story grabs you because it's so clean, so impossible. A man walked onto a plane with nothing but a briefcase, took $200,000, and stepped into the night, leaving a puzzle with no edges. The bomb, the parachutes, the unmarked bills. They're pieces that tease without fitting. It's a heist without a finish line, a shadow without a shape. Did he outsmart everyone, or did the wild claim him? The pulse of this mystery beats on, daring us to wonder what happened when that plane flew empty into the dawn. Want to chase more tales like this? Stories of daring, disappearance, and unanswered questions? Join Mystery Pulse to uncover the next intriguing adventure. Subscribe now and hit the bell so you don't miss a single beat.